All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this policy pop-up webinar, proudly presented by the Professional Development and Enrichment, or PD&E, Subcommittee of the Professional and Administrative, or P&A Senate. My name is Dr. Alex Badges, and I serve as a senator on the P&A Senate representing CFANS, and I'm also a member, actually, the co-chair of the PD&A Subcommittee. We are thrilled to see so many of you in attendance here today, and I know more are joining as I'm speaking. On behalf of the P&A Senate, I would like to express our deepest appreciation for your engagement with our programming. Today's session that you are all here to see is entitled Promoting Integrity and Preventing Research Misconduct. Every Role Matters. In today's session, we'll explore the foundations of responsible research conduct and how every member of the university community, from grants administrators and certified approvers to bench scientists and research administrators to educators and students and beyond, play a vital role in maintaining our university's professional reputation as a leader in research. We will also provide a detailed overview of the university's recently updated research misconduct policy and discuss how it applies across all stages of the research lifecycle. In that light, we're delighted to welcome our two presenters. Daniel Rintala is the Research Integrity and Compliance Director at the University of Minnesota, where she directs the Research Integrity and Compliance, or RIC, team within RIO. And Celeste Scheftel is the Research Integrity and Compliance Manager at the University of Minnesota. She oversees research integrity education initiatives, trainings, and outreach, like today's event. I'll be turning it over to Danielle and Celeste in just a second, but before I do, just a quick word about the format of today's event. Danielle and Celeste are going to start with a presentation that should run between 35 and 45 minutes, after which time we will transition to the Q&A session. That said, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit questions for the presenters at any time during the webinar. Please do not use the chat for this purpose. However, if you would like to use the chat to have some kind of side conversation or to seek technical help from any member of our committee, go ahead and do that. We have several folks who are manning the chat for that purpose here today. I will say that this webinar will be recorded and available to all registrants via email and on the P&A Senate website once it has been uploaded to YouTube and properly closed captioned. Please note that closed captioning takes some time, so the recording may not be available for a few weeks. We appreciate your patience in the meantime. It is coming. Now, without further ado, I'll hand things off to Danielle and Celeste.
Thank you, Alex. And it is wonderful to be here today and talk to all of you. And what I am assuming is your smiling face on the other side of the Zoom, although I'm not privy to see those. So today, like he said, we're going to talk about promoting integrity and preventing research misconduct and how every role at the university plays a role in this. So our office is within the Research and Innovation Office, which is led by Dr. Joanne Billings, who is the interim vice president for research. She oversees a variety of different groups on campus, such as centers and institutes, the Research Capacity Building, and RAR, TechCom, External Affairs and Communications, operating, such as ORIS and Human Resources, Research Administration with SPA, Corporate Engagement Center, and then our Research and Compliance Group. And so Joanne is still the AVP for Research and Compliance, which has the IRB, the IACUC, the IBC, as well as the Research Integrity and Compliance Group, or RIC. And so most people, when they think about our office, they primarily think about research misconduct. And our office is kind of split up into two main groups. So we have the Research Integrity and Compliance Group, which is mostly led by Danny, who is the RIC director and the interim Research Integrity Officer. I am the RIC manager. Evan is our RIC specialist, and we have the Certified Approver Manager, Penny Harris. So with this portion of our office, we primarily deal with research misconduct, research integrity, responsible conduct of research, and the Certified Approver Program. So if you have questions with any of those, we really want you to email the ric@umn.edu inbox, and we'll be able to answer questions. The other half of our office is really focused on export controls and research security. So I'm sure everyone has been hearing lots and lots about research security and the ever-changing federal landscape regarding the research security training. And so this is led by Pat Briscoe, and he has two specialists who work with him, Amber and Maddie, and they are all very knowledgeable about export controls, research security, and economic sanctions. So if you guys have any questions regarding the export controls and research security, I suggest you email the eco@umn.edu inbox and they can answer your questions. And so while most people think about our office in the context of research misconduct reviews and investigations, we also do a variety of different things. So we have the compliance and integrity reviews and investigations, but we also have the research ethics and integrity education and outreach. And so I think it is very wonderful that we are starting to be more proactive about research misconduct and talking to people about responsible conduct of research. And I was actually invited to speak to you all today after I did a seminar for the Fisheries and Wildlife and Conservation Biology. And I talked about how we really want you to see our faces more and to see that we're not scary people. And if you have questions, to come and talk to us early so that we can mitigate things from snowballing into research misconduct. We also have the Certified Approver Program, Export Controls and Research Security, and the Research Policy Management. So today we're going to be talking mainly about our recently updated research misconduct policy, but we have a variety of other policies that are in the administrative policy library, and they detail research misconduct, how we do investigations, um, the responsible conduct of research. And so if you get a minute, I suggest you read through those and see kind of what are the procedures, what are the rules and the things that we see. So when I do these seminars, I really like to think about research integrity as having a knowledge. So what is research integrity? Why does it matter? And what is your role? The skills and the attitude of understanding what your role is in preventing research misconduct and detrimental research practices. And then the skills, how do we understand the review process and the consequence of research misconduct? How do we report misconduct and um, engage with ethical problems? So what is research integrity? Research integrity serves to uphold the society's trust in science and foster scientific progress. I like to think of research integrity as having five main pillars. So the first pillar of research integrity is honesty in all aspects of research, including when developing, conducting, reviewing, reporting, and communicating research. Reliability, ensuring the robustness of research with the appropriate design, methods, analysis, interpretation, and use of resources. Transparency in reporting the research data, as well as declaring conflicts of interest. Accountability for the entire research process from conception to communication and its societal impacts, as well as training, supervision, mentoring, and funding. And respect, care and respect for all research participants, humans and animals, your colleagues, and the environment. And so how do you put these five pillars of research integrity into action? This is where the responsible conduct of research education comes into play. And so we have an administrative policy about responsible conduct of research education. And depending on if you're funded through NIH, NSF, or USDA, they all have different ideas as to what constitutes responsible and ethical conduct of education. And so as a university, we had made a decision that we want everyone to have training in these core responsibilities. So the first one is authorship, understanding who deserves to be author and having authorship agreements and talking about authorship early on in your research career. Collaboration, understanding what everyone is responsible for doing and what is the outcome. Are they going to get publications? Are they going to get presentations and so forth? Conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment, declaring when needed, as well as data management. Financial responsibility with sponsored projects and proper use of your research funding. mentoring in healthy research environments, peer review, research misconduct and plagiarism, understanding what is research misconduct and how do you report it, and then export controls and research security. And it's important to note, particularly if you are, a program coordinator or you are a director of a T32 training program, if there is NIH funding for a training specific, they do require 8 hours of in-person, face-to-face responsible conduct of research education at least once every 4 years. So if you are a program coordinator or you deal with T32 students, please be aware that that is a requirement from the NIH. So today we are going to be talking about research misconduct. I've included plagiarism in this because plagiarism is a type of research misconduct. So what is research misconduct? Like I said, we have an administrative policy as well as a Board of Regents policy on research misconduct, and this policy was recently updated in 2025. And so research misconduct is the fabrication of data. So making up data or results and then reporting and recording them. The falsification of data, manipulation of research materials or equipment or processes, changing or omitting data such that the results is not accurately represented, and plagiarism, copy and paste, presenting work as your own without acknowledging the source. And so these are the three things that make up research misconduct. And while these three things are really, really detrimental to research, they're not the only things that can hurt research integrity. And so when we updated these policies, we've added in a few new definitions. And in particular, we added in detrimental research practices, which are actions that do not meet the definition of research misconduct, but they do threaten real and perceived integrity of research and researchers, as well as honest error. Honest error is a mistake without a deliberate or reckless intent. Honest error is not research misconduct, but it can be detrimental to the research enterprise and warrant additional action by the research integrity officer to ensure remediation. And so one thing that I want to point out at this point is that research misconduct is a choice. And it's not that you wake up one day and you say, today is the day I'm going to fabricate my data in this publication. It's typically a snowball, right? You might start off with something small and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so research misconduct is really going to be starting off with these detrimental research practices. And so if we can find these and acknowledge them early, maybe we can prevent it from snowballing into research misconduct. So detrimental research practices is really where our P&A and our civil service groups are really going to come into play, because you are the people who are going to see some of these detrimental practices. And again, if we can stop these early, then they won't snowball. So again, these are actions that do not meet the definition of research misconduct, but they threaten real and perceived integrity of research and researchers. They may include, but is not limited to, the inappropriate use of human or animal subjects, non-compliance with sponsored projects, or misuse of research funding, concerns or issues arising from the action or activities of regulatory boards and committees, such as the IRB, the IACUC, the IBC, authorship disputes, peer review issues, misrepresentation, breach of duty care, improper dealing of allegations, and neglectful or exploitative supervision and research. And so maybe you're in the RAR space and you notice that someone is using animals incorrectly. Maybe you're in the IACUC or you're in the IRB and you find out that someone isn't following their protocol and are using humans the wrong way. Maybe you're a lab manager, a project manager, or a researcher, and you notice these problems. It could be that you're a grant administrator, a lab manager, a certified approver, or an auditor, and you see that research funding isn't being used correctly and they aren't following the requirements from sponsored projects. Maybe you are a program coordinator or a lab manager, a program director, or a researcher, and someone talks to you about these authorship disputes and you aren't sure where to send them and how to give them help. and understanding, that you can contact us, you can contact your department, and they can help to figure this out. Maybe you are in the IRB, or you're a researcher, a clinical research administrator, or a clinical professional, and you realize that people aren't being treated and giving the care that they needed in certain studies. And finally, neglectful or exploitative supervision and research. So maybe you're a program coordinator, a lecturer, a lab manager, or a researcher, and someone talks to you about their research environment and how, you know, they are not feeling supportive, that they are kind of doing it by themselves, um, and understanding that that can be a detriment to their scientific progress. But ultimately, detrimental research practices, everyone in the research community who supports research may have access and see some of these happening. And so really understanding what are detrimental practices and acknowledging them when they happen can stop it from progressing into research misconduct. And ultimately, research misconduct does not just happen. It's a slippery slope of bad choices that can include detrimental research practices as well as misconduct. And so we had two policies that were updated, the Board of Regents policy as well as our administrative policy, that had more updates rather than just the detrimental research practices and the honest error definition. And so I'm going to pass it over to Danny at this point so she can talk about the policy revisions as well as reporting misconduct and going through the research misconduct investigation steps.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Celeste. So we spent a considerable amount of time, and for many of you that have ever gone through a policy review know that it takes quite a bit of time. But this particular policy had a very large community that we needed to visit that also came on the heels of maybe some things that all of you saw in the news that were unrelated to the fact that we've been working on this policy for over 2 years now. And so we had an overhaul to a Board of Regents policy and an administrative policy that were required to maintain compliance and maintain our assurance with the Public Health Service funded research. And this is done through the Office of Research Integrity. The revisions were made with extensive consultation across the university community. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Board of Regents policy first, but I'll also talk about the consultative process. So the consultative review and approvals really started back in March 2025 after we spent all that time getting our initial drafts ready for review. Some of you may recall, even back in fall of 2025, we did present to the Board of Regents about research integrity and research misconduct, just to give them an educational context of what we were going to be bringing to them for policy review later in the fiscal year. And so in March and April, we went through the Senate Research Committee, the Senate Committee on Faculty Affairs, the Senate Consultative Committee, the University Senate, and then the University Senate was a vote for action. And so we did get a unanimous vote of approval on the policy that we presented. Then we brought our policies to the Research Integrity and Safety Collaborative, the Council of Research Associate Deans, and finally to the Board of Regents for the initial review. We were given feedback by the Board of Regents, which we took into consideration and did some additional revisions and went back to the Board of Regents in June, in which they voted on the policy and it passed unanimously. And then we still had the administrative policy out there to try to get pushed through from the Board of Regents policy review. And so we did everything together in terms of consultation initially for both policies, but for the administrative policy, it still needed to go through Equity Lens Committee and Policy Advisory Committee review. And after it went through that review, it finally got to go on to the last step, which used to be what was called the Presidential Policy Committee. Now it's just straight to the President's Cabinet. And then the president and President Cunningham's cabinet reviewed and approved it in September of 2025. So just a little bit about all the changes that we made. And like I said, all of this is largely in part due to the federal regulatory changes to the policies on research misconduct, but some of it is equally because we recognize that there were things very much missing in our own policy. And our policy, our Board of Regents policy, hadn't been updated in 15 years. So a lot of things happen in 15 years in the world of research integrity. So there was a lot to say for revising that policy. And the same with the administrative policy. It had been quite some time since it had been substantially overhauled to include things that maybe were not of discussion or didn't really exist in context 10 years ago even. And so we changed the naming right off the bat of the Board of Regents policy from academic misconduct to research misconduct because it's focused on research. And we added in the definitions of fabrication, falsification, intentionally, knowingly, preponderance of the evidence, recklessly, researcher, and research misconduct, which some people may say, well, they didn't have those terms. Well, they didn't have any of those terms except definitions, except for research misconduct. And it was a really, really broad definition that didn't really match the definition that the federal government uses for all agencies for the definition of research misconduct. We also included the requirements for findings of research misconduct in the policy revision, the determination of a detrimental research practice, which I'll talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about what that was. And then misconduct of academic, scholarly, or creative work, which is handled a little bit differently than research misconduct, so the specific allegations of research misconduct, but has a similar process and a similar outcome for someone that engages in those detrimental behaviors. And then the applicability of the policy to students. So in the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the administrative policy, which, as you know, is the policy by which we enact our day-to-day operations here at the university. And in general, it just needed a lot of cleanup. The language was a little bit dated. We need to make sure that all the changes made in Board of Regents policy aligned with our administrative policy. And we also added 5 new sections. So conflicts of interest for the panel members, sequestration of research records and potential evidence, which we already had an existing appendix for, but we also put some information about how that happens in policy. Institutional record, which we now have to maintain a full record of every single allegation, inquiry, and investigation reports that we do for a period of 7 years. Handling allegations and a collaboration between multiple institutions, detrimental research practices, and other research integrity issues. We had a whole smattering of new and revised definitions, and we merged the procedures to make one unified procedure because it was 3 separate ones, which confused people. They're like, well, I don't know which one to pick when I want to understand how a process is being reviewed. Now it's one procedure. So I think the most important for you, and the policy is probably less glamorous, but the most important for all of you to understand is how to report potential misconduct. I hope that everybody here is aware of U-Report. U-Report is not just for people who want to report workplace issues or other issues. It's for everything, right? So if you have an issue, you can report through U-Report. You can be completely anonymous. And we encourage people to report any research compliance concerns through U-Report because it gives an institutional level tracking mechanism. But you could certainly reach out to us directly via email or meet with us in person if that is something that you're more comfortable with. we want to encourage people to feel like they can come to us and talk about any research compliance issues that they may be facing in their role here at the university. And so, okay. So the reporting guide um, kind of focuses on a couple different areas. So the first is we have a research risk intake form for general research risks that we think need to be escalated, and it gives me the information necessary to take it to the VP for research. This is not anonymous. It's just a situation that you feel like you want to report. So don't use it if you want anonymity. But we do have the report form, as I said. And then we also have a procedure that you can kind of take a look at, which is now all one procedure. So that handling, this is a website update we need to actually make now that I'm looking at it. The university handling reports of research misconduct procedure is now part of that research misconduct procedure. And that will give you a better detail of research misconduct reporting. And so, what happens once we get that allegation? Well, we have a process that we have to follow according to both our institutional policy as well as federal regulatory policy. So, even if we have a research misconduct allegation that's not subject to the federal regulatory requirements, our policy dictates that this is the process that we follow. We're being consistent by following the same process each time, so that way allegations are treated the same. And so the first thing that happens is we go through an assessment process. We assess for the credibility, specificity, and whether the allegation meets the definition of research misconduct. We also give the respondent an opportunity to review the report and provide comments. If there's a credible, specific, if it's credible, specific, and it meets the definition of research, then it has to move into what we call an inquiry. If it is not credible, it's not specific, and it doesn't meet the definition of research misconduct, then we can close it at inquiry. But even if we close, or at assessment, even if we close it at assessment, though, we have to have clear documented reasons why we close it at assessment, which the federal government can request of us at any point. So if we had a situation where we closed something out, but they got an allegation at their office that they felt had a different outcome, they could request, according to federal regulatory policy, they could request that assessment report. So if the allegation is determined to need further review, we'll go into what's called an inquiry phase. And the inquiry phase, we carefully examine evidence. This is where we will go into a lab and sequester data. That may mean that we actually take whole pieces of equipment, or we are working with our team from information security to collect data from equipment. And then we carefully examine the information that was presented to us. If it's a plagiarism case, we use tools such as Authenticate or Copy Leaks to do evaluations. And then we always consult with a faculty member that has appropriate expertise to give us consultative advice on what we have reviewed. The respondent, after we've completed a full inquiry, is allowed to review that report and provide their own comments and feedback. If we think that an investigation is warranted because the evidence supports that there may have been research misconduct that occurred, then it has to go to a full investigation within 30 days of inquiry. Ultimately, though, the research integrity officer does not make the determination. They make a recommendation, and the institutional deciding official has the final approval. And at the university, the institutional deciding official is the vice president for research. And so if the inquiry is substantiated to have potential for, for that investigation, Then there's a formal panel assembled of faculty members and someone that represents the person being accused, accordingly. So, for example, if this person in question was a postdoctoral research associate, then we would find a current postdoc at the university that's in like a similar subject area that could re-examine the matter from the lens of being a postdoc. If it's a graduate student, again, finding a graduate student. If it's somebody that is a P&A research associate, we would find another research associate of that same level, kind of in the similar field to represent, to look at it from the work lens, right? So from what the work environment might be like, and the challenges that you face in that stage of career. And the respondent, so during the investigative process, we do actually do a formal interview of the respondent and any complainants, or any other people that we think might be relevant to the case. Those are documented by a court reporter, that we have. So there are transcripts made and recordings made, and the respondent is allowed to review the entire report, and provide comments. That report is then provided from the panel to the research integrity officer and ultimately to the institutional deciding official for the final decision. And then that decision only is specific to whether research misconduct occurred. Our office does not make determinations on like the next steps. We make recommendations for like we think somebody's employment should be ended, or that needs to go in their file, but we don't actually get to make those calls in terms of making it happen. We work with people to communicate and support that happening, but that's ultimately a university level determination. So what happens? So how do you figure out if it is research misconduct? Well, there are three things that we look at. We look at if there is a significant departure from accepted practices of the relevant research community, whether the misconduct was committed intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, and whether the allegation be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. So what happens once we have these reports? I think that this is one of those situations where a lot of people aren't sure how that information gets communicated. And the fact of the matter is, as many of you may know, we are subject to the Minnesota DPA, and that restricts the accessibility of us, or the ability of us to communicate information to different units. And during an allegation review, so at no point does a complainant ever have the right per se to get from us the reports. Now that's not to say they couldn't go through the process, say they went and tried to get the data outside of our office, but we are not going to transmit reports to the complainant through the allegation, inquiry, or investigation. The respondent always has the right to see the reports. The department chair, it's really case dependent during the allegation review and inquiry. And this is particularly because, remember, these can be closed at either stage. And it can be very detrimental to someone's career to just be accused of research misconduct, much less have to go through the process. But when they go through an investigation, then the department chair is, of course, notified because they will be the ones that determine, if the person stays employed or not. The research associate dean is again case dependent, always after the outcome of an investigation. Same with the dean. And we do not notify the general public. So we're not putting anything in the newspaper at any point. Now, that said, if somebody was found guilty of engaging in research misconduct, and there was a disciplinary action taken by the university, once there's a disciplinary action taken, that information becomes public. But we don't make the disciplinary action happen. We just recommend disciplinary actions. So who gets hurt? Well, I think there's obviously the researchers and the lab members that get hurt that are in those research groups because they could lose their jobs. And I'm sure that's what many of you think about as P&A, that for you, being part of a research group could be really risky of reporting something because what happens to you after something like that, happens? But there are other groups. There's, of course, the university. That's not good for our reputation. We end up in the news for all the wrong reasons. There's the funding agencies. So the NIH, the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, et cetera. Those all the agencies that provide funding to us and organizations for that matter see when something happens in the research misconduct space and it damages our relationships with them. And then the translation of research, right? Because that credibility of the science and translating it to from research to innovation gets damaged because there's a lot of money and work and time that goes into research, and other researchers at other institutions and in industry rely on the research that they are citing to advance knowledge. And if they fail to, and if that's done dishonestly, but when someone engages in research misconduct, they now that translation is lost. But most importantly, I think one that's up here, Celeste, you want to click? I think most importantly is the public, and it's the people. When we talk about anything in the medical field, if we have bad science and bad actors, it harms the people that participate in the studies. It harms the general public whose taxpayer dollars fund our institution. It harms the public trust that they have in the research that we do. And so we recognize that these, while the other areas are all, yes, very much important, it's the people, right? It's all the other people. It's the public. And it is your jobs, and it is the labs. And so it's the people that get impacted the most. It's everybody else. And so, of course, I think one thing that we wanted to kind of talk a minute about is, in terms of research misconduct in the spotlight. So during the Biden administration was when the Office of Research Integrity passed the new regulatory policy for implementation, and it has moved forward. I suspect, and don't quote me on this, I suspect that they will be sort of the Office of Research Integrity will become kind of the liaison for probably broader agency support outside of PHS eventually, because the Restoring Gold Standard Science executive order that was issued does look now during the Trump administration at ensuring that science trust is upheld, and quote, confidence that scientists act in the best interest of the public has fallen significantly. And so it highlights really the reproducibility of research, the transparency of research, being communicative of when there's errors and uncertainty, and knowing that those are also results, being collaborative and interdisciplinary, structured for falsibility of hypotheses, being skeptical of findings and assumptions, subject to unbiased peer review, accepting of negative results as positive outcomes, and doing your research without conflicts of interest. Right now, this is very focused inward to agencies, but we are assuming that in the near future we will see rollout of new notices and policies from the agencies that are expected of institutions receiving their funding. And I did see the comment. I played the fifth. So a quick summary. Conducting research responsibly is central to advancing science, maintaining public trust, and ensuring the integrity of our scholarly community. And we really want to reemphasize research misconduct doesn't, and detrimental research practices for that matter, they don't just cause problems for individuals. It's the whole institution, it's the general public, it's whole fields of science. It spreads pretty broadly. Every role matters at the university in recognizing and preventing misconduct and detrimental research practices. And Celeste has definitely done an exemplary job of getting out into the research community to provide outreach and education. So this is just the sampler platter for today. But if you see things here that you think, hey, I think it'd be really great if we had Celeste or myself come on site and talk to you more about relevant areas that you heard about today, we would be happy to do so. And so, just a spotlight, we have some upcoming events. So, mark your calendars. We do have during Research Ethics Week, we will have a research integrity workshop. It will be a free 4 hour in person workshop targeted kind of at grad students, postdocs, new faculty, new researchers. But it's open to everybody. And I definitely encourage anybody from PNA here today to attend our workshop. And it's good for some networking. It will be held in a to be determined location on campus, I think probably the Union. I know that we've been looking at some sites on the East Bank, so that is coming in the horizon. We also are the hosts of the virtual Big Ten Academic Alliance RCR conference, the April 20th through the 22nd, 2026. It is free. It's a half day, so three half days from noon to 3. And since we are hosting, we are trying to hopefully increase the participation and engagement of our university community in the conference this year. So we hope to see all of you at these events. And here are just our resources. You will be provided the slide deck so you can click to see all the different resources we have available. And now I think we'll take some questions.
All right. Thank you, Danielle and Celeste. We do have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and start with the first one. So the greatest concern for some of us is the risk of non-renewal if an investigator who holds contractual authority is reported for questionable conduct. Because non-renewal can occur without cause or for no cause, it seems like there are few protections against retaliation. Anonymity is often impossible on small teams, but are there any options?
So, yeah, the anonymity piece is a challenge, right? Because as mentioned, it's often impossible on small teams because you're going to know that something happened. And I do recognize the concern that people have about non-renewal if they report something, because at the end of the day, if a PI is fired for something you reported, everybody in your lab might be without a job. But I could say two things. One, I think that Dr. Billings is working very hard to protect the honest people that are reporting in good faith to our office, and working with senior leadership to ensure that people won't lose their jobs because of reporting either research misconduct allegations or non-compliance issues. And we continue to work and advocate for the retaliation policy at the University of Minnesota to be revisited so that we do more to protect people that are the whistleblowers. And at least from my stance as somebody in the interim research integrity officer role for all of 9 days now, or not even 9 days, yeah, 9 days. I very much care more about protecting the people in the lab space, and protecting their their jobs and their students being able to finish their programs, than I am about anything with a PI if they are found to have engaged in it. Even if they are found to be innocent of research misconduct and it was reported, then we still want to make sure that we actively work with HR to prevent retaliation against someone for reporting an issue. And so I can't give one good answer to that just because I'm not HR, and I'm only one person, but I do recognize that there are few there are few protections, and I think that that's something that we need to do better with at the university. And I am definitely trying to work with Joanne on supporting better.
All right, thank you. Another question here. If a researcher includes one or more citations that doesn't exist and may have been generated by an AI tool, as an example, Robert Kennedy Jr. and the Maha report, um, is that then fabrication, falsification, or an honest mistake?
Well, this is a good question because we don't have clear AI policy, right, at the university. This is still something that multiple institutions are grappling with. Citations that don't exist, so if they're hallucinated, citations that were populated by generative AI are not necessarily seen as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, but it is seen as a detrimental research practice. Now, if you were to go down a further rabbit hole of not just citing bad references, but making up information that doesn't actually exist or data that doesn't exist, then you would be fabricating, right, data that you're using in a report. And that would be engaging in research misconduct. The generative AI piece, though, with hallucinated citations, I think we're still trying to navigate how to handle that. It definitely is something that's detrimental and is really on that fine line of engaging in research misconduct. And so, but we don't have anything written in policy clearly of how we handle it directly at this time. And I think right now we largely feel like it is a detrimental research practice at the very least, and does warrant some sort of, some sort of review. And it is very it's a very difficult space just because we don't have a good policy to follow for it. And I just want to see what uh, in the chat. Right. And yeah, it's pretty easy to cite a real paper and claim it makes an argument for a point that that paper doesn't actually support or do. And that does also happen. So more often than we would like for it to occur. And so yeah, I do think it's a detrimental practice and it's damaging, right? Because you're giving bad info, you're using made up sources. And that's a problematic practice. I think.
All right. I have a few more questions, and these next two are somewhat statements, so I'm going to try to tease out the question as best I can. This one attendee writes, "It's hard to trust your office to actually hold people accountable, as it feels like the main job of the office is to protect the university and its reputation. So reporting any non-compliance is extremely risky for staff, students, fellows, junior investigators, especially when it feels like the faculty will always be protected." And a second person wrote, "I echo the previous anonymous attendee's comment about protecting faculty and the UMN's reputation as the top priority." So what I'm getting from this, and I hope these folks will correct me if I'm wrong, it almost feels like there's a questioning of the integrity of the office, um, and whether or not faculty would be held accountable for their misconduct. But I also feel like it speaks to a little bit of retaliation as well if somebody were to report that. So could you address this?
Okay, so number one, when you say it's hard to trust our office to actually hold people accountable, uh, we do the review and we give the recommendations. We can't determine at the end of the day what's done with those recommendations. We don't get to make the decision whether someone stays employed at the university or is dismissed from their job. The second is that I recognize that people feel like they don't have trust in an office when there have been things in the news. And I would like to echo to the response to that we have thousands of researchers at the University of Minnesota, and there are like two people in the last year that have been in the news, and that information that the news was working with was very limited, and we can't share a lot of the information, right? Because at the end of the day, unfortunately, the reality is that we do have the Minnesota DPA that keeps us from saying a lot of things that we would like to say. That said, I've been the research integrity officer for 9 days now, and both of the cases that were in the news, I was not the real for. And I know, at least from my own stance and also from Joanne's, who Joanne stepped into the role kind of at the tail end of those. Data Practices Act is what DPA stands for. And so we stepped into it kind of at the end of those things. When we receive an allegation, I have no interest in protecting people from that engage in bad behavior. And I can say that from at least a personal level. I am not a fact, and what the university does at a university level, I don't get to make decisions on. But I know at least from how I believe there's a reason I work in research integrity. And if the research is bad science and they knowingly, intentionally, engaged in or recklessly engaged in that bad behavior, then it's not just my decision. It's not my determination. There's faculty that are on those panels that make the recommendations of what they see. Everything is done in consultation with other subject matter experts, and we make our recommendations and we give them to our institutional, deciding official, and they go out and they make their determination, and then they recommend it to the departments. And there is at no point where I think there's an advantage for us to hide anything in our office. And I respect that people don't that they're honest in saying they don't trust our office. I can respond to that this office didn't exist 2 years ago, so it's so the Research Integrity and Compliance Office, that is, I mean, obviously not Rio. Have a little bit of trust that we are here because we recognize that the university had gaps that needed to be filled. And we are working very hard to restore that trust with our research community. But we can't, Rome was not built overnight. And we just in the same way can't just make substantial change overnight. But hiring Celeste and Evan over the summer was part of growing our team so that we can better support the research community and uphold high standards of research integrity.
All right, thank you. We have a few more questions here. We'll try to get through them.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, some reports are deemed not to meet the definition of not to meet the definition of research misconduct, even when the facts seem to strongly suggest otherwise. This feels concerning as it may put staff, students, research participants, and the broader scientific community at ongoing risk. What options does someone have to request that such cases be reevaluated or reviewed again?
So you can report through the U-Report system. And if we see new information about a case that we didn't know about before, we definitely would re-review it. We're not going to just say, well, we already reviewed it once and we're done, especially if we get new information. I can't talk about specifics of cases, but I can say that we definitely do things that follow federal regulatory policy. And any case that we have gone through, I am 100% confident in what the outcomes were historically, at least while I've been in the role, because of what we had in front of us at that moment in time and what we were, what information was made available and what people said when we talked with them. And so I stand by what decisions have been made historically. And since I can't talk about the cases, it's very hard to describe why outcomes were what they were. But I can say that if somebody was to engage or you thought they engaged in research misconduct, it seems like nothing happened, then, you can always come back and report again. And so, it's been I've only been in this role formally appointed to even handling research misconduct cases myself here at the U. In the last 2 years, I've been here for 4 years, and Celeste has only been in it since the summer. And so we definitely will always be willing to re-review something if people feel like it hasn't been reviewed. But remember, we can't release information if there's not a disciplinary action issued, that's a state law. So that is part of it, is there's just a very one-sided informational view that people get. Um, and with that, that's all I think I have to say. And I think that's all the questions.
We have one, we have one
Oh,
more.
okay, perfect.
Somebody just needed some clarification on what DPA stands for. You'd mentioned that.
No. Yeah, so Data Practices Act. So if you go on the Minnesota like state regulatory pages, it's called the Minnesota Data Practices Act. And so that act specifically calls out, and so this is where general counsel comes into play. This is we rely on general counsel to tell us what we can and can't say. But this law prevents us from releasing information without there being a disciplinary action taken on a person. And this is also to protect employees in general. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, thanks, Josh. Of course, I had somebody, from OIT here that could chime in. But it really protects university employees too. Okay. So and I'm saying, okay, if you need more information on DPA and want to understand it better, I definitely recommend checking out their website and reading through it a little bit, because it is also designed to protect you as an employee when you're accused of something, especially if you didn't do it. It's basically the way to prevent things from getting out there when that could be harmful to you when you're innocent of doing something, or you haven't been shown to engage in some, sort of punitive or something that would require a punitive measure from the institution. Any other? Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, okay. I will take over from here. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. On behalf of the PNA Senate, I want to thank Danielle and Celeste for sharing their expertise on a topic that I know is super relevant to all the work we do here at the U. We trust and hope that this discussion was both interesting and informative for everyone who attended. Before we close out, I want to strongly encourage you to consider serving on the PNA Senate. Basically, all the folks from my team here that were here today are proud members of the PNA Senate. And if you value programming like the webinar that we put on today, your participation and encouragement are essential to making that happen. Plus, of course, we're in a time where every voice matters in shaping university governance and policy. So come and add yours to the mix. We'd love to have you. If you are interested in learning more, please visit the University Senate website at usenate.umn.edu. I will also say that we value your feedback on these events. We've been placing in the chat as we've been going a link to the post-event evaluation form. I hope that you will take the time to fill it out at your earliest convenience. Lastly, please stand by for some upcoming events from our committee. Our next scheduled event of the term will be on developing strong and effective supervisory relationships, and that's coming up in February. So stay tuned for an announcement and an invitation to that event soon. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a happy holidays as well.